Organizational Structure, Part 2. There are a few basic organizational strategies for essays, and you've probably encountered many of them before. They include general to specific. This is when you start out broad, but then you keep narrowing and focusing in on your topic throughout the essay. Sometimes you'll see essays that do the opposite too. They start out with a specific instance or example and use it to extrapolate out to the larger, more general idea. Problem, cause, solution. This organizational structure is most common in traditional argumentative essays that are proposing a solution to a problem. The basic idea is that you first identify and explain the problem. Then, you examine the causes of the problem. Finally, based on the information you've presented about the problem and its causes, you propose a solution and explain how it would work and why the reader should agree with your proposed solution. Sequential. This type of organization is usually used when giving directions about performing a specific task or explaining why you took a certain course of action. In this organization, the writer identifies and explains a step-by-step process and takes the reader through that process with him or her. Chronological. This means time order, and it is commonly used in narrative essays or essays that tell a story. There are other organizational strategies, of course, but these serve as a representative sample of the basic ones. Obviously, we can't completely abandon the basic organizational structures. That would be like saying you're going to make a pizza, but really making ice cream. The two processes have very different end results. However, you are free to mix it up when it comes to the basics, and often a little bit of creative play here can result in a much more powerful essay than if you'd used one of the tried and true basics only. Let's take the narrative essay for example. It is most often told in chronological order. In this example, since you're relating a memory to the reader, it makes a lot of sense to start at the beginning of the story, progress to the middle, and finally reach the end. However, that's a pretty predictable pattern for the reader. So how might you spice it up a bit? One way is to start in the middle of the story, at a key dramatic moment, and then go back to the beginning. You see this happen on television or in film quite often, where a story starts in the middle of the action and then in the next scene, text appears on the screen that says something like 24 hours earlier. Writers sometimes use this same organizational approach because the beginning and backstory of a particular memory are often important to understand what's happening, but not actually all that interesting by themselves. If, however, the reader is wondering how you got from that ordinary beginning to the dramatic action that you've previously introduced, he or she will be more compelled to keep reading and find out how it all fits together. Another approach you might try is withholding some key information or giving a bit of a false impression. For example, if you are telling readers about a car crash, you might purposely allow readers to think that the person with you in the car died for part of the essay before revealing that in fact he or she survived. Now you have to be careful when doing something like this though. If it seems like you're simply being dishonest for shock value, you lose credibility with readers. However, if you simply leave that question unanswered for part of the essay, or if your experience was that you thought the other person had died and you only found out later that he or she survived, then sharing that emotional journey with the reader can be very powerful. Your essay will be much more memorable as a result. A couple of caveats here. It's okay, and perhaps even better, if you write out a story as it makes sense to you at first, and then go back and play with the order. Human beings are linear creatures. Part of the reason we like stories that are told out of order is because it's more engaging for us as an audience to mentally put the story in the right order as we go along. As storytellers, however, we often think of the story in chronological linear order. That means it's more difficult to write it out of order. It's a lot easier to write it in order and then rearrange it after we have all the parts down on paper. Also, there's no one clear way to get creative with any basic approach. It's like that basic pizza. There's no surefire way to make the perfect pizza, and you only find out what you think is the best pizza by experimenting and trying out different toppings in different amounts and combinations. The same is true of writing. Experiment with different organizational and structural choices. Some will work out great and some will flop. But as is the case in all of life, we learn as much or more from our failures as we do from our successes.